Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our work session for Monday, June 7th, 2021. Our item tonight is downtown zoning ordinances. We have 60 minutes set aside for that, and Director Stephanie Sheets will start us off on that conversation this evening.
So this evening's primarily about council having a discussion related to the zoning ordinance draft that we went over at the committee meeting last time, and that you received in the packet, and a paper copy as well for your convenience. Just a couple introductory comments. As Karen's cover memo with the packet indicated, tonight is discussion for the council on any of these aspects, and the discussion ends up feeding into the decision matrix. And so with each item, we will be asking, is that something to be added to the decision matrix for further consideration and evaluation? That's the same system that we followed with the Planning and Zoning Commission. You received a copy of how that worked, and so hopefully you can understand the format of that pretty well. Just a little bit of background about the project. Zoning was identified as something to revisit for the community back with the 2012 comprehensive plan. And so it's been something that's been on our docket for a while, and that has been discussed in several goal settings. And then we kicked it off with the downtown area with the vision planning and project priorities for that, and then adopted that vision plan in November of 19, and here are with a draft of the zoning code for consideration. So anything like this big of a project is going to take quite a bit of time to move through all the steps. Why take a look at the zoning and revisit that? Not only because that was something that in 2012 was identified, but policies like this and regulations are a big deal. And when we have regulations that have been around for 40 years or more, it's probably time to revisit those and think about what we want in place, and whether we want to tweak what we have or whether we want to replace what we have. That's the evaluation that we're doing at this time. So just a little bit of the background there. We have heard throughout this process what are some of the concerns that we're trying to address here, what might be some of the issues, and so I just put a little bit of thought into that this afternoon, and might mention a couple things over my almost 7-year history with the city, some of the things that I've seen where maybe some better clarity in the ordinance might have helped to address the issues. You never know. There's always going to be an issue, so I'm not here promising one way or the other, but for example, what a project that was being built when I came to Cedar Falls was the first project related to the River Place development, and there was some question about, did that look too industrial for our downtown? Did that fit the character of our downtown? I'm just characterizing some of the things that I heard about that. I'm not saying positive or negative one way or the other on that development, but I know there was a lot of community conversation about that particular building. We revisited that conversation with the Hampton Inn when it was built. Is it too tall? Does it fit in? How does it compare to other buildings? What the architecture? Should it be a little bit more conservative? Should it be more modern? There were a lot of conversations that way. We had a community member that did a sketch of things that they thought should be different with the building. So there was a lot of conversation about that particular project. The Arabella project, one of the things we heard from the neighbor about that was the transition of it being right up next to another property where it's a 3-story building, and then I think it was a 1-story building right to the back of it. And so should there have been maybe some more transition, whether it was more yard area or a step down of the building? Those are neighbor relations that actually the proposed code speaks to that type of issue. So those are the types of things where, trying to give a couple examples of things that we dealt with that that staff has heard that we have tried to incorporate into the ordinance and worked with the consultants on. Obviously, parking has been a big conversation, and parking is a component of this as well. On the private side, not the public parking system, which will be a later agenda item today, but this is private parking. And one of the bigger areas is what happens when the second floor and above propose a reuse. Maybe they're being used as office and they want residential. Well, there is a parking requirement in our ordinance. Should there be on an existing building? Maybe they don't have the capacity to provide that on the property. So those are things that we're talking about with this code. So those are just some examples. of some recent conversations that we know of that we're talking about when we, or that we've tried to address and add some clarity in what's proposed here tonight that council will talk about. So, and this ordinance is for the study area that we've talked about here with the zoning map that you have. It's called the regulating plan. There could be in the future, as we look at other areas of town, maybe some of what what we'll be considering for adoption with downtown fits, but it may not apply in every situation. So just because it's right for the downtown might not mean that it's right for some of our neighborhoods or some of our other commercial areas. And so that is an active evaluation that will happen kind of area by area of the community. So just some thoughts there, as I know you probably have a lot of questions, and so we are here along with the consultant to try to help answer those questions and think about what changes council might want to see to the ordinance in front of you.
Thank you, Director Sheets. Since this is a work session, it's a little bit of a different format for us. Normally in a work session, we would be in a conference room and looking directly at each other, and it's a much more informal appearing setting. And because of the need to be able to show this on Zoom and to connect in, we have to have it in the council chambers. I'm a little sad about that because I think we get a lot better discussion or more candid discussion when we're just together in the room with public observation. But with that said, this really is just a discussion tonight. I will not be calling on members unless someone just isn't being heard or can't get in edgewise. But this is really meant to be an open discussion. So I'll open it up to council, and we'll be happy to assist with facilitation as needed. So just go right ahead.
I've got a question. Along First Street here, it only shows a half a block that's C2. It would be nice if that was the full block, because a lot of things that go into a C2, whether it's a Quick Trip or McDonald's, which is already there, just doesn't have enough square footage. Why did we jog in there and make those only a half a block? The reason I ask that, my dad was a realtor years ago, and I used to ride around with him, and we'd talk about all kinds of things, and he talked a lot about commercial property and how important it was to have it on both sides of main thoroughfares. And I don't understand why we cut these back, because next to it is R4, which is the good transition between a C2 and anything else. So it would be nice if we could have that come out to 2nd Street all the way along the front from Washington. Washington is already C2 all the way down here, is what it looks like. What's the reasoning to only have that be a half a block deep? You could have a screening along 2nd Street if that was a problem. I just wonder why that was only a half a block.
So the maps that I handed out to you, I also can show it up on the screen as well, so Mary and Jeff can see, and Elizabeth. If Denny, if you want to show it, should be on my screen here. So zooming into that, I don't know if you can zoom into that First Street area, but this is the current zoning map that shows a C2, R4, C1, with the new zoning underneath. The colored areas are the new zoning underneath. So the C2, R4, R3, C3, all those would go away with the new zoning. And so the map that you see that's colored would then substitute be the new zoning here. So if you look at that First Street area, actually in several spaces there, the new zoning will go further into that block towards 2nd Street than the current CC2 zone area does. You see the colored yellow area is the higher level zoning.
Yes, but it only goes a half depth in those blocks.
Goes about 3/4 of the block. So we made it a little bit deeper than what the C2 zone is there now, so that you, to your point, so that commercial development could, or mixed use development could have a little bit more space, but then keep the zoning the same on both sides of 2nd Street, so that there's room in the vision plan. The vision plan showed a transition there from 1st to 2nd, as being 2nd Street being more residential in character and showing some potential for like tuck under townhomes along 2nd Street. So the new zoning does allow for both larger area for the commercial, but then a little bit of space along Second Street to accommodate a different transition into the neighborhood.
Who called for all of this rezoning? Who requested to rezone all this? I don't understand it.
So the goal, as Director Sheets just said, the goal for the downtown vision plan was to adopt the vision and then to adopt zoning that was going to implement the vision. So in the vision plan, there were different character areas that were set up. And a lot of people saw that those R4 areas and R3 areas were areas that have a lot of single-family homes. A lot of people have their owner occupied. So the current zoning that's R4 and R3 were maybe a little bit high density than what most people would like to have as a transition from downtown to Overman Park neighborhood. So I think that was part of the vision, is people would like to preserve the neighborhoods that are there and not cause a total turnover of what's there now. So that's why it's really a little bit of a downzoning in that light blue area.
Okay, other thoughts or questions?
What's that?
Any other questions?
Oh, no, I'm just a little bit confused on that, how you want to change that area when it was R4, which would be apartments and those kinds of things, which would be a denser housing. And then it goes to say that on the color-coded map, it says neighborhood small. What is that supposed to mean, neighborhood small?
So like I said, there was a lot of discussion during the visioning process with the community and concerns about that neighborhood.
Does it mean small house or a small lot?
It means that it's more of a residential neighborhood character like it is now, so kind of helping to preserve the neighborhood that's there now. It does allow a variety of housing types, but within the scale of what the current neighborhood. So instead of 3 or 4 stories, it's 2 stories basically. So you could do a few townhomes, you could do some duplexes, small apartment building, but it would have to fit into that character with the single-family homes.
I'd like to follow up with that.
Certainly.
With the idea that we're changing these zoning, you mentioned discussion with the community. I've had the opportunity for the last couple of weeks to talk to quite a few people, and most people have no idea what's going on here. And they view it as taking their property rights and what they can do into the future. Now that's what they tell me. But it appears to me that we're, like you say, down zoning back to, residential neighborhood. But how are we going to accommodate the next 50 years of growth in the city as we grow from 41,000 to 51, 61? The downtown area and the needs of having a downtown area are going to grow. I would think we would want to have the ability to go into those areas as those homes become older and older. They're going to become obsolete as far as desirable homes. In my mind, you see that happening throughout communities everywhere. As communities grow, what used to be residential becomes light commercial or downtown, whether it be dentist office, chiropractors, realtors, that sort of thing. So it seems like we're putting in barriers here for growth. Could you comment on that?
Maybe I'll let Mary or Jeff comment on that too. I can respond, but I'd like to give an opportunity for the consultants to respond to that.
I could, one comment. While there are protections in the 2 neighborhood zones, the neighborhood small and the neighborhood mediums, as the citizens were interested in having, there is what I would consider a lot of extra capacity in the urban generals and the storefront area. So there's an awful lot of capacity there. It doesn't mean, the city growing doesn't have to mean that it has a lot of parking lots in the middle and erodes the neighborhoods around it. Those can work together. Now there is some room for some minor infill and minor densification in the two neighborhood areas, with an attempt to keep the scale down. But the big issue about allowing Cedar Falls to grow is in the areas that are under urban general and the storefront, of course.
Mr. Mayor, I guess it is just a discussion, isn't it? But it seems to me that the reason we have this, number one, again, it's called the vision plan, but we're thinking in terms of how communities are growing today, but how they're going to grow in the future as well. And the combination of housing opportunities in this compact area seems to be how communities are growing. I think one of the reasons we, number one, talk about having a vision is to think in terms of where are we going from here, not how do we do what we've always done. And if we have a vision and we're moving ahead, I also think our likelihood of growing, Daryl, is probably better. But we're giving people multiple opportunities to coexist in a small area between an apartment building, a duplex, a single-family home, a walkout, whatever. This is, in my mind, a very inclusive opportunity. And you know, the last conversation too was a lot about parking. My goal would be to see a lot fewer cars being used in our community. If we build a town that allows people to walk to work, or whatever, not even need a car, that's, I think, part of the future. And I think our responsibility as a city council is to plan so that we can grow to meet the needs of the next generation, not rebuild what we've had before. And so I get that it's kind of scary that it's not what we're used to, but the nice thing about it is we're doing it ahead of time, and when some of this older stock gets run down, there'll be options that are appropriate to rebuild in that location. But if you want to live in an apartment, there's 2 blocks down, you can do that. And it makes sense. It's what we asked them to do, and I think it's really right on as to what we need to do for the future of our community. And I get the concerns about parking, or I get the concerns about a single family versus apartments, but all of that seems to be in here. And if you want to live in a mansion someplace, you can move a few blocks down the road. We've got all kinds of options in this community, but this is the one that's going to attract a lot of new people.
Go ahead, Simon.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. I want to follow up on what Frank was saying a little bit, and then a question. I can see both sides of the coin with what Daryl was saying about possibly expanding out the urban general too, but I also see that there was a concern to mitigate the growth out that way due to wanting to keep the character of the neighborhood, which actually is a beautiful thing because we keep these old historic houses. I don't think they're worth tearing down, actually. I think they're worth preserving and storing and keeping forever. They're beautiful, and it just adds to the overall character and value of our community. The one thing I would say is that if we grow to 51,000 or 61,000, that's fantastic. That council can then change this and move it out, correct? So we can grow, the councils can grow as this grows. So I'm okay with the, at this moment, I'll keep thinking about it, and I want people to keep bringing it up, but I'm okay with the color coding at the moment. My question is based around the form-based zoning. The whole goal of the form-based zoning is to be very specific, right, on what developers can do. In other words, we have a form, and we have these categories, and they check off all these boxes, and then there's pretty much no ifs, ands, or buts. If they check off the boxes, they can do it, right? So is there a checks and balances in place if say they feel like they've checked off all the boxes but it's denied? Is there anywhere that they can go? My interest is seeing what we have as far as checks and balances with the form-based zoning.
Does Elizabeth or Mary want to answer that question?
Elizabeth, do you want to
I'm here.
describe the process generally?
So that was an accurate reflection of the process. If an applicant works their way through the regulations and they're able to check all the boxes, then their development should be approved. If they are denied and believe that they should have been treated differently, they can appeal that decision to the Board of Zoning Appeals. That is the way it works under Iowa law. So when you have an administrative approval, the appeal goes to the BZA.
I'm sorry, who does the appeal go to? I couldn't understand what she said.
The Board of Adjustment. Goes to the Board of Adjustment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
I was using the incorrect terminology.
That does bring up a concern that I have. Having been on planning and zoning for 12 years, I very much appreciate the role of a group of citizens when a development comes along who will represent the concerns of other citizens. And earlier you talked about this being convenient because it doesn't even have to go through P and Z. And I guess I have a concern about the viable, keeping P and Z viable, keeping them engaged, giving them a role. So how does this impact the role of P and Z in any of this? I'd like to better understand that.
So there's a lot of zones in the city where development doesn't go through P&Z and council for site plan review. But the role of the commission is the bigger picture items like rezoning the property. So for example, if at some point in the future, the city determined that it was a good idea to change from neighborhood small to urban general, that would be a question for P&Z and council. Is this consistent with our plans? Is it so it'd be rezonings, subdivision reviews, all go through P&Z, but the actual individual site plans for these overlay zones, which is typically the only place where P&Z and council review these, is in the city's zoning districts that have overlays.
Okay.
I would just add in it for that term of convenient for developers. I think there's more to it than that it's with a process that's very clear and that is well laid out. It's not just to make it so it's more convenient for developers, but to give them a much greater sense of confidence that the money they spend on the development of the plans actually will be approved as is and isn't subject to whims or the subjectivity of a public review process. So I would think that with the denial, certainly if something is approvable, that yes, we want that to happen at the staff level, that it can move forward without intervention. But if it is denied, then there would be either an appointed or elected role to review that and see if it should still be approved. And that's my understanding of how that process would work. Other questions and thoughts?
Yeah.
Yes, Councilor DeWeer?
Well, if I understood Stephanie, you're basically saying you're looking at doing this only in this area and right now nowhere else. But yet when they did the College Hill plan, they used an area much, much wider than just the College Hill area, which I understood that was for getting it prepped and ready for this same type of form-based zoning. Is that not correct?
Yes, with the College Hill Vision Plan, that large study area, we have looked at that as well as whether that's a fit for form-based zoning as well. Given the heart of the College Hill area, that area in particular probably lends to it. Do all of the neighborhoods, that's something that we're under discussion now about, and we will see as zoning progresses with that area to see if that's a good fit. I guess, for example, in some of our newer areas where we have R1 and R2 zoning, it may not be a fit in that area to talk about the small neighborhood frontage or the medium neighborhood frontage. That might be a better fit for the study area of the downtown, possibly for College Hill.
Is that due to the
Is that-
grid structure?
What's that?
Is that due to the grid structure of the streets, like how they're laid out? But that's very different.
It's more due to the nature of kind of some of the zoning that is found there now. A lot of what we're talking about in the downtown area is R3 zoning, even some R4. I don't know, I haven't looked at the map to know how much of that area is R1 or R2. Certainly, as Councilmember DeBurr's pointing out, the northern area of the College Hill study area does have a fair amount of some R1 and R2 area. So I think that's going to be something for discussion.
And the entire southern area is all R2. The other question I had is, I've asked many times for a list of, you gave an example of a few reasons why you want to change the entire zoning code. And I'd like to see a written out examples of what are the zoning problems as to why we need to totally revamp it. Instead of just a couple examples kind of that are vague, I'd like to see exactly what the problems are. Because it seems like we're creating a whole new thing instead of, well, what are the problems that we really need to focus on? And I've been trying to get that answer, but I don't seem to be able to really get it.
I think part of it is,
Mayor?
oh, somebody speaking?
Go ahead, Mary.
I would like to elaborate, and I think also this might help with a previous question about, checking the list. If people get everything right, then they can get by right approval. We learned a couple of different things while we were there working on the downtown vision plan. For example, the area around Overman Park, it's predominantly zoned R4 and a little bit, I think, C2. A lot of folks who lived in that neighborhood were unaware that their zoning was R4 or that their neighbors were. And so one of the questions you have, Councilmember DeBurr, about what are we trying to change, when people realize that their neighborhood now, a lot of uses are allowed in R4 that many people are unaware. There are very few standards at all. There's a 45-foot height limit, and I think it's a 10% side setback, so about a 6-foot side. So someone could come in right next door to your home and tear down the house that's there and come back and literally build a concrete box with a parking lot around it. And R4, that would basically be permitted. To date, you all have not had that kind of pressure, but we started hearing from people in the neighborhoods that they would like those to be nearby, close, walkable neighborhoods. So that's when we started looking at how could you respect the existing context, but allow people to intensify if they wanted to build duplexes or small apartments. So there could still be more intensity there, but to provide more development standards to respect the existing context. So the understanding of what is currently allowed, particularly in R3 and R4, was one of the things we really focused on. In some of the other areas as well, even the C1 and C2, people were concerned. The downtown is really different than a lot of the rest of Cedar Falls, and people wanted to enhance that uniqueness of downtown. That there are a lot of other places in the city that are C1 and C2 that could accommodate a lot of the broader commercial development. But if you're really trying to create that compact, walkable, mixed-use area, trying to think more affirmatively about what you would like to see the development be like, and not just regulating by use and very broad parameters. Once you get outside of the CBD overlay, the existing zoning has very little development standards embedded in it. And that was a message that we heard in talking with the community. How can you more affirmatively encourage or require the type of development that the citizens indicated they would like to see?
Simon?
So I encourage you, if you haven't looked at the building form standards, to take a look at what is actually there and what sort of development would be required and how clear the rules are. Because that was, again, one of the things we were trying to do, was move away from subjectivity and try to give measurable standards.
Stephanie, is the confusion on whether the people had an R2 or an R3 zoning because the zoning was changed after their housing developments were built? At some point, a citywide rezoning was done and these houses were changed from R2 to R3.
Hard to say. I'm not sure. I mean, the last time that there was a citywide rezoning was probably with the zoning ordinance that was done in the 1970s, I think, early 70s. So I'm not sure. I can't think of a number of properties that the city has initiated a rezoning for in the downtown study area, for example. So I'm not thinking of any offhand for the area that we're discussing tonight. There probably were just petitions here and there for things.
Go ahead, Mark.
I can appreciate the magnitude of this and us taking it in this little chunk, if you will. I think it's massive for us to look at something like this, and if I'm being honest, I don't think most people know what their zoning is. And for us to be having this conversation, I think it probably opens a lot of people's eyes to it. The decision matrix, I think, is fantastic. I think a lot of the questions that have come up tonight have been in there, and I was hoping to get some clarity on something came up regarding the west side of Overman Park and allowing existing businesses to stay conforming in a standard two-story building or home. Can you guys elaborate on how that conversation went and some of the changes that were made in that regard?
Yeah, P&Z did have a conversation. There was a number of those older homes that were converted into offices, and there was a concern about making those non-conforming with the new zoning. So the P&Z discussed it, and we gave them some options for changes to the draft, which was to basically make them conforming. So keep all of the existing businesses that are there now in that area and make them conforming. So that means that they could continue to do as they do, and they could even expand if they wanted to, according to the new zoning. But there wouldn't be any new allowed that wasn't allowed under the new code. So it does allow those to continue.
So if somebody wants to take a two-story home and not modify the building, but put a business in it, in that, what is it, neighborhood small zoning, is that allowed?
So you wouldn't be able to do new, but it does hold anything that's there now as conforming use.
You wouldn't be able to put a business there.
Right. In the neighborhood small, but then in all the other
In the
zones
urban
that are
and the rest of
nearby,
it,
there would
sure.
be, allow a whole mix of uses.
Thank you.
Just clarify, outside of a home occupation, which is permitted, I think, just to the point that question came up before.
Sure, and I guess I was, the antique shop was down there, and I thought it was super cool, in an older building like that, to be able to have a business, especially around Overman Park, because it kind of lends itself to that, so.
Well, everything that's there that would be non-conforming would be allowed to stay. I mean, you're not going to tell somebody they have to close
No.
up their business, are you?
Everything stays in,
Yeah, and
is
that's-
conforming. Yes.
Where P&Z ended up, correct?
Yes.
They're all conforming, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
We don't see a lot, or for the neighborhood small delineation, we don't really see that much on this map. But is that the sense that if this were to extend out past the downtown character district, if you're looking at, say, Walnut Street and Olive Street, would that lend itself, do you think, to a neighborhood small determination potentially later on down the road?
Well, it could, but of course, we'd want to be checking in with the community on, areas outside the study area. So the R2 and R1, and to Susan's question about R1 and R2 in College Hill, I think that is totally up for discussion, because we need to make sure that it's consistent with what the vision is for those areas. And the R1 and R2 are a little bit lower density, and so the question is, are there areas that we want to allow some transition, or are there areas that we want to preserve?
Okay.
So I think that's an open question for those areas we haven't studied yet.
Okay. Simon?
Kind of to tag along with what Councilmember Miller was saying, is there a way to be creative in some of that neighborhood small area? Let's say like a small antique shop in an older house. Obviously, that's not the goal, but is there a way that if someone wanted to possibly apply or get creative to do something with a building that was maybe, condemned or something like that in there, rather than restoring the house? Is there any way to look at that possibilities even, or no?
Under the way that's written right now, only the existing businesses that are there in that neighborhood small area would be allowed to continue. So we would need to make a change to allow office uses but like I said, we have a very generous home occupation ordinance. So you can do just about anything in your home as a business as long as you're not disturbing your neighbors, basically.
Yeah, I get it. I guess, and that makes sense, and I don't want to throw a wrench into it, but I was just thinking, is there even a way that we could add something in that, like how we just did with we just passed the ordinance that allowed someone to apply for using a church for something creative, right? In a residential neighborhood. Is there a way that we could possibly look at if someone wanted to put a coffee shop right there, just walk in, in that neighborhood? I don't know that that's appropriate, but if we shut down all possibilities and there's no avenue for them to look into it, I don't know.
I'd like
Just throwing it out
Mary and
there.
Jeff to respond to this, but I do think that there was something in that when we did the vision plan of concentrating the commercial activity in the downtown core. Because if it spreads out too far, I think the economist that was working said you end up diluting your commercial market and you may end up harming downtown. So you want to, try to keep it. Maybe Jeff and Mary have a response to that.
Karen, I was going to say the same thing, that the economist, market specialist on our team did indicate that the further you spread businesses out, the walkability kind of goes down, and businesses get a lot of synergy from what they're next to. In addition, one of the things we really saw in the study area, obviously in addition to Main Street, you have State in Washington, but you also have an extensive area on Clay Street. There is a lot of land area that is designated to accommodate all sorts of smaller scale businesses, et cetera. So that was really what we were trying to encourage by taking a look at the zoning. Again, the R3 and R4 permit a lot of office use today. They don't typically actually permit retail type businesses currently. So we were really trying to sort of strike a balance there. But I think we could look at a lot larger area. The R4 around Overman Park is obviously a really attractive neighborhood, and I know there's a lot of different things there, including the Women's Club where we did the charrette meetings. But it's all in close proximity, and obviously you all can explore a lot of but we're really trying to get the concentration of the mixed use, within a couple of blocks of Main Street, and then try to get more residential close to that.
Makes sense.
I have a comment, question.
Yes, please go ahead.
You mentioned the townhomes and duplexes and things like that going into the neighborhood small area. I've seen over the years a great aversion against rentals proliferating in any way into a residential area, but yet it sounds like you're in some ways encouraging it because they'd be close to downtown for walkability, because a rental would displace potentially a single family home being built there.
I can respond to that a couple of different ways. Obviously, the R4 currently would allow extensive rentals. The townhouse is a building form. It does not say that we would encourage the creation of owner-occupied row houses and townhouses, which are actually very common in a lot of communities. But this is silent, and typically most zoning ordinances are not trying to regulate owner versus rental. It's so that could be either way depending on who might do the redevelopment. I don't know if Jeff or Karen wants to elaborate, or Elizabeth.
Just the same.
When you increase the density, how does that impact crime statistics?
I don't know if there's any correlation there between, I mean, we wouldn't know that necessarily. And
just
we're not
curious.
talking about a huge increase in over what's there now. Obviously, in the neighborhood small area, we're actually going down a little bit from the R4 and the R3. So really, we're just talking about incremental change here, really not.
Karen,
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's something I would throw in, and this is on the margins, consistent with what Karen said, but the building form standards do, one thing they are careful about creating and fostering are buildings that are focused on the streets, so you have one of the most effective parts of crime prevention is eyes on the street. So these are building types that do foster safe, walkable streets.
Okay, other questions for now? All right, we're seeing none here. Certainly more discussion
I
going
got
forward.
something I want to ask, if I
Yeah,
may.
go right ahead, Daryl.
We haven't touched on the parking requirements in this discussion anyway. It's looking like you're gonna, the tail wags the dog in most construction projects where the parking determines how many bedrooms and what sort of structure is built by on-site parking. If you go to what is proposed here, half and 3/4 and a quarter parking and so on with shared parking, I see that there's going to be a lot of drift, or whatever you want to call it, of people parking in the neighborhood small area and irritating homeowners that can't park in the front of their homes or use their own street parking. I see that as a big problem because we've been hearing that around the Hill particularly.
So we have a few slides here to show kind of between what the current zoning and what the proposed regulations are for parking. I don't know if we have enough time to really go through all of that, but I think in general, we're trying to respond to the actual demand for parking and not, create a lot of spillover parking. That's not the intent here. It's to basically respond to, there's an awful lot of 2-bedroom units in downtown which have a single person living in them, and so they have just one car. And then there may be other apartments that have more vehicles in their household. So overall, for the whole project, the question is then how much parking do you actually need for those buildings, and is it actually one parking space per bedroom? Are we wasting our space our land downtown by requiring too much parking? And that's really the question. And one of the things that was studied during the parking study for residential was that we're probably over parking the residential and probably under parking the commercial. And so there is actually a small commercial parking requirement for the upper floor commercial, like office space, in this code that wasn't there now. It's not there now. So it was trying to balance and take the parking study that we had to look at where our parking requirements are now and where they might be out of sync with what is actually demanded for these sites. And we do know that there's a trend toward 1- and 2-person households across the country, and including Iowa. I was just in recently a webinar where they showed the statistics for the entire country, every state, and I was right there in the mix of a lot of increase in small households, and yet there was a mismatch between the housing units being built, and who actually wants to desire to live in these areas, particularly the mixed use areas. So I guess the question is, we need to set the parking to fit the parking demand, and what that is, we're trying to address that here and not cause a lot of spillover parking into the neighborhoods.
But to further comment on that, when you add more retail or office space in the storefronts and other downtown areas, you're going to bring in the employees that are in those establishments, staff, customers that want to come there, clients and so on. And it's a very, very delicate balance. And everything that I'm aware of in the rental world, 95% of the people have cars. And as a community, we draw people from little towns around us to come to Cedar Falls downtown and enjoy it. And it fills the streets. And if the streets are filled with the homeowners or the residents of the apartment buildings, whether they're condos, if they own them, what have you, we're already at capacity. And then we add more to it. Whatever we add more has to have corresponding parking for that as well, and the customers and the wait staff and service people. So I don't know that we want to rest on our laurels and say that we're comfortable or overbuilt in parking, because I don't think we are. Because the downtown is becoming a more and more popular destination, so I have a concern there that we don't want to get too lenient on required parking.
Okay, other comments from council? Questions? All right, and
So for decision matrix, just to talk about that, since that's where we were trying to head, about any topics that the council would like staff to do additional analysis. There was a question early on, which I think the decision matrix handled in terms of the C2 zoning and along 2nd Street. So I don't know if there's more that's requested out of that or not. I heard a question about a more detailed analysis of our current zoning ordinance and trying to give a little bit more detailed information about what the challenges are as to why this is proposed. Are those items that the council would like to have further considered in the decision matrix, or are there any more with parking?
Yes.
The P&Z Commission had quite a bit of discussion about parking, so if there's something more for that, or...
I really am interested if you're going to be pushing all these row houses in exactly how that does impact with the high density crime in the downtown area.
okay, so study or add that to the information.
Well, I'd like to see along First Street be the full depth for commercial, all the way along there. That's the way it should be. It's got a little jog in and out right now, and we have McDonald's there as full depth. I think up to Tremont and on up to Iowa, at least, should be the full depth there.
So that was already addressed in 9 for the decision matrix. The commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, directed staff to keep the regulating plan the same, no change recommended after they considered it. So this would be running counter to the recommendation of Planning and Zoning. So the only way I
Well,
want to...
the other thing too is, and Frank and I actually agree on something, I think planning and zoning is quite important. Not that I'm going to agree with them all the time, but I like that element that we have planning and zoning.
But I'd like to stick to the
okays on
the
it.
first part, so first. And
I know, but that's my concern, and that's what I'm still trying to push, that those are the full depth, that's all.
And in that, Planning and Zoning said that
I
the
understand.
recommendation was to not change it. So if there's a consensus for council to allow that full depth from First to 2nd Street of being the entire, that whole section being urban general, we'll entertain it. Otherwise, I'm not seeing
No,
that
I'd like
consensus.
to analyze that.
So 2, and it was not a vote, but I'm just not seeing a consensus to move forward on that.
Well, it would be nice to know, what are those homes now? Are they homes? Are they businesses? What is on that street that Dave's talking about?
So that would be
Well, for
2nd
calling for a
Street to about
consensus,
Walnut.
we got to ask.
I believe the one's a car wash.
Yep, car wash, McDonald's, I think veterinarian,
Yeah, it's all the way through there.
scooters.
But the homes on Second Street are largely either rentals or they're houses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I guess, I don't want to get lost in this, that the public directed this, saying that we want this neighborhood to stay this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what led our consultants to outline this way, is public meetings and the public attending those, saying, we want this neighborhood to be residential. So I hope that doesn't get lost in what we want in this because it matters. They attended the meetings.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason to not go the full length is then to keep the character of the neighborhood. So in other words,
Character of the street.
yeah, the character
Yeah.
of the street is what I meant.
Yep.
So in other words, they're not staring across the road at a new business being able to put in. So that's the intent, and it makes sense to me. I'm okay with it going 3/4 of the way down to keep the character of the street.
It's a tricky one. I've had a couple
It is.
conversations with people that wanted to see that full depth there because developers typically want that full depth, and I get it, but I think we've also got to be cognizant of the rest of the community too, and you know, that the
Well, to me,
residents came to these meetings and said, we would like to see our neighborhood stay like this, and I think we absolutely have to respect that, and that's what guided our consultants to come up with this. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I understand the developer side, and I don't want to limit development either, but I also think that we as a council have to look at that big picture and say, we've got to have neighborhoods here too, because staring at the back of a car wash isn't the same as looking across the street and waving at your neighbor. So
Jeff, did you have a comment you wanted to add in? I didn't see you earlier.
Well, my comment was just referring to the things we heard in the from the neighbors, as Councilman Miller was saying. I was going to say, consider the neighbors who live on the other side of 2nd Street, how they might react. I'm thinking pitchforks and torches at the next council meeting. If you tell them that that the lots across the street from them are going to be raised and turn into the back end of McDonald's and drive-through banks and things like that. But that's why we stopped it at the 3/4 point, is to preserve the value of those houses. And of course, that value is something you want to hold the line, because if you erode it, it kind of starts to eat away a little bit like cancer. Careful transitions are an important part of the code.
But this was the point I brought up earlier. In the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, homes become obsolete in one way or another, floor plans, building materials, which I'd like to talk about the vinyl siding eventually here, but there has to be an acceptance that, you know, a neighborhood will transition and change into light commercial, full commercial, what have you. So look at our First Street that has now been expanded dramatically as well. You know, things change.
Yeah,
Jeff?
I would point out that's a model of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, where essentially there's a lot of small towns and cities hollowed out and sprawled out and kind of ate the neighbors. The current towns that are being successful, it's about filling back in at a more compact development level. And a lot of the neighborhoods that were eroded are starting to be renewed as people move back in, and the trend has been for some time back to those walkable communities. So what we're trying to do is preserve that so that the renovation can continue and not have the old model of things spreading out with like an erosion.
Well, if we plan it properly, it won't erode. I'm saying if our town doubles in size, will our downtown business numbers of businesses double? You know, there's going to be a point where you can't stack them on top of each other anymore. You can't go to the riverside, so there's got to be room for expansion. So
Well,
highest and best use of streets next to the downtown may be something other than residential.
I think the plan allows for it. with
Yeah,
the-
so I
the
think we
urb-
can change it over time. That's supposed to be, zoning is not supposed to be something that's set in stone. As the city changes, the zoning maybe should change. just like
Decrease
we're
the
considering
intensity.
now.
Okay, I want to get a question in about the vinyl siding here before we run out of time. Talked to a number of developers, and I guess they were surprised and actually astonished that you would say no vinyl siding on a new structure. Doing my research, good quality vinyl siding can last 40, 50, 60 years, and with good maintenance, it's listed at 100 years. So it's a good product to use in building construction. Obviously, there's cheap versions of all materials, and cheap vinyl wouldn't last. but it's totally recyclable from what I have researched. So I'd like to see a little more consideration there on allowing that going forward for new construction.
This was addressed in the decision matrix too, wasn't it? Huh?
Yeah,
Item 10.
I thought they allowed it, correct me if I'm wrong, but they decided to permit certain uses of vinyl siding, right?
On an existing building with vinyl, you could put an addition on that also has vinyl, but in new construction, I believe, it's not going to be allowed. Is that correct? What P&Z decided?
Correct, right.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
They're saying that new
Yes.
construction in these
So, on the-
neighborhood small and medium is going to have to be brick or stone.
Or wood, or cement board, or hardy plank,
Brick.
smart siding. Right.
Okay. Well, we are close to
Contractors
being
that
at
have, they
time.
were-
Go ahead, Daryl.
The contractors that I speak with say that the vinyl siding is a viable product, and the good quality vinyl will stand the test of time just like any of the other products you mentioned, and not necessarily look cheap or that sort of thing. So there's a concern there that should be addressed.
Well, I think the argument with vinyl siding, which we could probably have an entire work session on, is that it's not it's not necessarily environmental friendly, and it's hard to recycle. It is recyclable. It's just hard to get access to recycling it. And then, of course, there's the question of when you burn it, if it releases poisonous gases and stuff. So I do believe the intention is to kind of look forward to the future and try to find alternatives to vinyl siding that would be more eco-friendly, correct?
I think it also matches the character of the existing
But- well, that's-
historic side of downtown Cedar Falls.
I agree.
I mean, being a contractor, I don't love the rules and regulations, but at the same time, if you're going to be in this area, then these are the requirements. They're not going to
Yeah.
be the same throughout the rest of the community, and I think it's worth respecting myself.
I mean, I like looking at brick. I know it's expensive, but it does look nice. So,
And here again, we're talking only new construction. There's only a certain amount of this that's going to happen in downtown Cedar Falls.
true.
So with that, we are looking at being at time for our 6:10 meeting. So it takes about 5 minutes to reset. So certainly opportunities
Mayor?
for continued discussion.
Excuse me, Mayor,
Yes.
before you move on, could maybe Stephanie get some clarification on what she needs to bring back for decision matrix items?
Certainly. Okay.
What we were looking for was to see if there was consensus on any of the items that were mentioned, as to whether council says, yes, we would like staff to spend time doing further analysis on it. So that's where, for each of these topics, we wanted to break down. So for example, the density and more crime. Is there consensus that staff should spend time looking into that to bring information back?
I'm not seeing a lot of eagerness to do so. So, and that's the interesting thing of work sessions. We don't take votes, but we just kind of do head nods here and see what the,
So then on First Street, allowing full-depth commercial, I heard a lot of what's noted in the decision matrix. I heard a lot about their homes on Second Street, but what other businesses are there? Is there further consideration that council would like staff to take on that matter outside of what's already noted?
seeing some head nods on that. Anything? No?
I think they should look at that for at least a couple of those blocks.
I'm not seeing a consensus on it.
It was mentioned about a detailed analysis of issues in our current zoning as to reasons why we need to bring forward this zoning proposal. Is that something that council would like?
Yes.
Okay, again, not seeing a consensus. So, no.
There was some talk about parking. Is there something further on parking that is not in the decision matrix at this point? There has not been any detailed outline or follow-up with that, although, like I noted, the Planning and Zoning Commission did specifically discuss it at one of their work sessions.
And that was a recorded work session, right?
Yes.
So that would be viewable. if you have questions about parking.
So what are you saying then, Ms. Sheets, that we're going to accept this half parking spot scenario? Because I would reject that totally.
Correct. If council is
justified.
not interested in hearing anything further from staff on that, then it would remain as written in the ordinance that was provided to you at the committee meeting and in front of you at that meeting.
We definitely have to take a look at that.
But I'm not seeing that as a consensus.
I agree.
So
I
one,
think we need to look at all this stuff. I mean, you're making a major revision to our zoning, and I don't think it should just be rubber stamped. I think you should look at all these issues.
Well, I agree.
let's talk about the parking aspect of this. Would council want to see more information?
I would. More information on the
Definitely.
parking and how
You got
many
3.
spots that they're requiring. Like Susan said, it's kind of a concern.
I don't view it as a rubber stamp. I'm doing lots of research and reading on my own. I guess I'm thinking of this as what do I want to direct staff to spend time on? I'm going to spend a lot of time on this, talking with people, researching, doing my own thing. So for me, when I'm not giving a consensus, it's just because I don't necessarily feel like staff has to spend time on that. That's all. So I don't want people to think like, oh, it's just a rubber stamp. We're just going to go ahead and click on this. No, I'm going to spend a ton of time on it. It's just, what do I want staff to spend time on? That's how I view it.
Okay, so I'm seeing a roughly 3-member desire to move forward with, so I don't believe that that is a consensus then.
Well, wait a minute. We need to discuss this shortage of parking because the citizens complain continuously to us. And to Simon's point, yeah, we can do our own research, but we got to have justification from the consultants of how they can say that we're going to share parking with people who build their parking lots. How are we going to maintain them and clean them? There's a lot of components of this that we just can't let this go through without detailed analysis.
But again, Daryl, this requires
zoning
a consensus of council, and I'm not seeing that.
I think one thing to add, though, is we're going to spend the next hour talking about parking, and then as they talk about adding higher density with a lot of row houses, you're going to increase your density, you're going to increase your cars, you're going to increase your parking problems. So it just seems like it's a natural discussion then to have to discuss parking again with this zoning change.
Fair enough. I'll go with parking.
Okay, so there's a
So-
consensus then for that.
We can talk about it. It's always fun.
And the last item I've heard, and hopefully I'm not missing anything, was about vinyl siding then that was just brought up, but that is in the decision matrix as well, so is there something further on vinyl siding?
I think not only vinyl siding, but some of the other siding they talked about that they are banning or not allowing. I was down in Houston, and there's beautiful buildings that under this zoning would not be allowed. And I'd like to discuss why those are not going to be allowed. I have photos that I can share with you of some gorgeous buildings, and yet under your rules, or these rules that are being put in front of us, they would not be allowed. I'd like to discuss it, yes.
Which product, Susan, are you?
You talked about some glass, a lot of glass, or the mirrored, or the copper mirrored glass type thing. They were all written as not allowed. It'd be easiest if I showed you the photos, and then, but I guess if we don't have 4 people willing to discuss it, then it's not even going to be allowed, so.
I agree with Susan.
Would there be 2 other people
I agree
who
with
want to
her as
discuss
well.
this? I got 3. One more? Okay, still only seeing 3, so not a consensus for that. So is that all you're looking for?
Are there
then, Dr.
any other
Sheets?
items we should have on the decision matrix? So right now, it's about parking.
Seeing none. So that, I think that covers the decision matrix then, and should be able to give you enough direction to move forward with, correct?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for Farrell Madden for joining us again tonight from East Coast, and we look forward to future discussions. So with that, that ends our agenda for the work session, and we will take a 5-minute adjournment back at 6:20 for our committee of the whole.